My first question to Dr. Konatori. Can you give us a quick update on what's going on in Sueda in the last several months, please?
What happened in Sueda is, according to many United Nations organizations, human rights, and many paper reports, raised to ethnic cleansing of Druze people. They were targeted sexual violence against women. There was burning of churches, St. Mike Church in Sawara, many religious places for Jews, and also that the numbers saying between 2,000 and 4,000 people killed in this ethnic cleansing. If you take the number of Druze people around the world, it's less than 1 million. This is a big number for this minority.
Since you are passionate about education, I know that other folks talked about the numbers. Can you tell us a little bit about the situation with the students, college students, and maybe grade schools, please?
Sure. Let me share a story. I have it from, since I'm really passionate about education. One of the very important things for people of Sueda is education. They value education very much. And one of the most important exams is the baccalaureate exam. This is how they prepare themselves for university and for future employment. The interim government decided not to give Sueda students this opportunity. They did not approve the final exam. So what happened is the community come together. The student sit for an exam. The teacher came. They are not paid. And they did the exam. The student did not ask who is going to approve that exam. They want to take it. They want to continue their life. This is giving you like a glimpse of the resilience of the people there and how they want their life to be. That's also about the university students, where they have been targeted for hatred messages. And one student, university student, killed in October while she was attending her exam in Damascus. She was killed in a bus with other 3 people, just because she wants to go and to apply for an exam. So that's what's going on from educational part.
Let me take it. Unfortunately, we have only about 7 minutes left, and we have to close this session on time. I'm going to ask Dr. Reinath about the humanitarian situation in the last few months in Sueda and perhaps other regions in Syria.
So what we can say is that the situation in Syria overall, in Sueda as well as in other parts, like in the northeast, but also Damascus, that the situation is deteriorating. What we have and what we can see is an absence of a legitimate government, systematic corruption and fraud, extremist legal frameworks, the integration of extremist actors into the military without oversight, security force complicity, also with the abduction of women, as well as, for example, the Damascus church massacre, deepening destabilization, centralist government failures. And so what the main problem, in my understanding, is that none of the minorities, those who stand for democratic values, if you want, those have no trust in the centralized government that is literally killing otherwise Christians, Druze, Yazidi on purpose. There are even accounts, and I think there are proofs, that these genocides or genocidal attempts were ordered from high above. And this continues. So what we have, just to give you some examples, so on December 26th, for example, the bombing of the Imam Ali Mosque at Homs, where between 18 were injured and 8 worshippers were killed. Then we have, for example, the deliberate killing of Alawite demonstrators under the oversight of general security forces. We There were counter-demonstrators who were shooting at the demonstrators. There was a car plowing through the demonstrations in Latakia. The security forces protected the driver and then attacked the demonstrators from where the car was being able to escape. There was a kind of blockage, for example. So there's clear evidence that the general security is always saying we can't do anything. That's also what the government is saying, but it's in the interest of the government to kill the minorities who stand up for democratic values. This is one of the major problems why this government cannot be trusted, and we need to have thorough documentation on these atrocities, so that the victims, and I believe all the other white families, all the Druze families, the Yazidi families in the past, but also now again, as well as Christian communities, have victims in their families. And I think this needs to be heard and this needs to be documented.
Thank you. As we race to the end here, I think we have a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask Mr. Ballard, what do you ask the U.S. government and Mr. Trump to help the Druze cause being an issue of terrorism that's going to affect the national security here at home?
Well, I'll start by saying, you understand that from President Trump's perspective, I've worked in the Middle East for my whole career, and every region, every country is full of good guys and bad guys, and sometimes they're a good guy today and a bad guy tomorrow. You have to thread needles in the Middle East like people can't understand. The reason I left the government over about 15 years ago was so that I could serve governments in a way that they couldn't serve themselves. For example, why did I go into Sueda in October of last year? Well, I was working with the administration. I was working directly with Ambassador Huckabee, with Congressman Stutzman and others, and I told them what I was going to do, and they can't. They couldn't send somebody in from State Department or CIA, because if something goes wrong, you could be in World War III. But I got asked by a congressman, I gave a briefing that Congressman Stutzman had set up before my second trip into Syria. And afterwards they came up to me and said, who do you work for? Do you work for the Department of State? Do you work for the DOD? And I said, I just work for Messiah, because with Messiah, if you work for Messiah, there's no deep state, there's no red tape, and the retirement benefits are pretty okay. So, and she laughed. They laughed, but it's also true. We can do things they can't do, but we help them to do the right thing. So I'm going to answer your question. So what we did, we were waiting for the right time to go into Sueda. The first time we went into the outskirts, but the second time we were going to go into Sueda. We had to go through ISIS, right? Because they had no place to besiege. It was a very crazy operation. But we knew that they've got to protect us because, well, what I told you earlier. So why did we pick strategically that time? Because the United States government had watchdogged over and had kind of monitored an agreement between Jordan and between Syria. It wasn't a fair deal because the Druze weren't represented, the other whites were represented in this deal. Okay, but still, we'll do what we can with it. The deal said that if the regime cannot control themselves or control ISIS, and if they launch any other strike against anyone in Sueda, then that gives the United States government the authority to work with the Red Cross and establish a humanitarian corridor out of Jordan into Sueda. So once I got that, I went to Israel. Why? Because I wanted to go prove that because I knew they were violating it every day. But I needed to go prove they're violating it. Because just a video from someone in Sueda isn't going to take, isn't going to have much credibility with it because people aren't even paying attention. But I just came from Congress. I told Congress, I'm going to go prove that they're violating the ceasefire. I'm going to go and destroy that. And I said, you better help. You better, if I get killed, you're going to become my wife. Because set the corridor out because they're violating the ceasefire. So we went in and got the evidence. I went directly on the ground so I could get it myself, directly from Sheikh Abu Salman Abu Tim. I got he handed me the evidence, and I took it to the embassy. I took it to Jerusalem, I gave it to Ambassador Huckabee, he gave it to Vice President, and President Trump got it. And we saw action. Okay, we saw some missiles drop, that was good, but I haven't seen the corridor. Where's the corridor? The United States government has the authority right now to establish the corridor. I hope I didn't risk my life for nothing. I went to get the evidence to prove the ceasefire had been violated, which triggers the clause in the agreement that says the United States government can now grab the hand of the Red Cross and establish a corridor. And so at this point, it's like, look, we're doing what we can do. Let's make sure everybody knows that President Trump now has the authority to establish a corridor, because I think once we establish the corridor, it has all sorts of natural, just inherent benefits that come with that. Who's going to establish it? Well, I would think the U.S. government, and that we have a military presence there already. So get out there and establish it. You see if you think ISIS is going to try something. If there's a corridor that's being secured by U.S. personnel, I don't think so. I don't think they'll think about it. And so you establish the corridor, you line it with, secure it with U.S. assets. It's not hard, we already have assets out there. You don't have to put that many out there. I mean, you touch one U.S. soldier, you see what President Trump did when 2 soldiers got killed in Damascus? You don't mess with that. So please get loud. Anyone who's listening to me in Congress or the White House, you have the authority now to establish the corridor. Don't make my life-threatening mission for nothing. I went and risked my life so I can prove to you that I give you the evidence you need to establish the corridor. Let's start with the corridor. It's simple. Start with the corridor. It's authorized, and then that will then bring forth.
Mr. Ballard says, corridor, withdrawal from the occupied villages, release of all the hostages, and preventing any further attacks on the Druze, because this is not really a problem of the Druze, this is a problem of terrorism, and I hope that we can stop it right there, and I hope we don't see any attacks anywhere else, including on our land here in the United States. Thank you all for attending the event. I really appreciate you guys came from different regions and even from Canada, guests from other states. I wish we had more time to discuss and have questions. And I'll give the microphone to Liam. Thank you.
Just while Jane is coming, the history has taught us that when minority is targeted, the terrorism is not contained in one small area. When minorities are a low-cost target, history told us many times that will not be confined in one geographical area. So I agree with you 100%. Saving the Druze is saving the world right now from terrorism. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this introduction. Thank you for being here. This is a tough subject. This is a subject that was not well debated yet, and now it is. And this is a subject that should draw the attention not just of the communities represented here and the experts, the staffers, but of the American public. We are a democracy, and it functions through dialogue and discussion and vote and consulting. So what we're doing right now in terms of foreign policy in general, Middle Eastern policies in particular, and specifically Syria, and in Syria, the Druze community, but other communities as well that you have already mentioned, including the Alawites, the Christians, the Kurds, and also the Arab Muslim Sunni moderates, who are not satisfied with what is happening now. So how to be able to explain it quickly, under 5-6 minutes, and at the same time join you in making recommendations. The goal has always been to help the Syrian people with all of its communities to get rid of any suppression and oppression. I lived enough years advising in Congress, at least since 9/11, various campaigns, presidential campaigns, engaged with various administrations, to know when I see a jihadist that that's a jihadist. And this was the first recommendation by the 9/11 Commission. Some among you were not born, and others remember that we had, after 9/11, a commission, a bipartisan commission, on behalf of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, and others, that debated the entire September, the entire summer of 2004, and brought together a document, which is, you can get it for free online and beyond, which is called the 9/11 Commission Resolutions. And in it, there were significant sections on recognizing and identifying in Syria and other than Syria, in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Libya, in Nigeria today, that there is a global threat called the jihadist threat. It has multiple faces. We don't want to spend time on each one of those, but just to remind ourselves, since we are speaking here in the chambers of Congress, that the U.S. government, that the U.S. Congress have already recognized that jihadists are a direct threat to the national security and foreign policy of the United States, wherever that is. And I'm reminding ourselves of it, because in the case of Syria, few things were missed in the beginning, even before the massacres that occurred, in the understanding and the definition of who came to power. The U.S. and our allies, and I was among those who worked on this, took 20 years to recognize that Khomeinism in Iran is a threat. It took many years to recognize that Baathism under the previous regime in Syria was a problem and is a threat. We acknowledge all of that. But there was no debate about who are these guys in charge of Syria today. Guys, I call them, well, they are recognized by the international community as a government, as a legitimate government. And that's where the debate is missing. And we know, and I know personally, that our administration, this administration under President Donald Trump, when they are convinced, when he is convinced that the United States need to protect Americans, need to protect our allies, as we've done with Israel, as we've done with many other communities around the world, there is an action in that direction. We are launching strikes as far as Nigeria to protect the Christian community. This administration and previously the first term, we have gone to make sure that leaders of the various jihadi organizations in the Middle East have been dealt with when they were dangerous, when they were killing. We had the head of the Quds Force served with something that was bigger than his life. We had the head of ISIS who was eliminated by our government. So the U.S. knows when there is a threat, when there is a danger, and how to deal with that danger. I have no problem with that. Actually, I am conscious that we are, as Americans here, lucky to be living in the United States, the greatest force, not just on earth, but in history, that is protecting its own population. So let me go quickly to the issue that we are debating right now. As soon as the new regime came to power, mid-December 2024, as soon as that regime came in, there was a big debate in Washington as to what should we do with that regime. There were various opinions. Some within the administration, counterterrorism, said, well, he has not changed. He has not changed, the head of the HTS at the time. So we need to continue to put pressure until he and his organization would change. What would that mean? Until Hayat Tahrir al-Sham would come on a microphone, not secretly, and tell the world, probably like Gorbachev or some of the others who have changed from radicalism to moderation, very simple words. And that's how, as a political scientist, I measure if they have changed or not. That's in theory. We're not yet talking about in practice. We have abandoned jihadism. That sentence is the key word that will tell us if jihadists have changed or not. Okay? They have to communicate. We have abandoned the goal of establishing by force a caliphate worldwide. Once those statements are made, then there is a dialogue, and then we can establish the fact that we're dealing with ex-jihadists, not with jihadists who are not telling us that they continue to be jihadists. Of course, that's my opinion. I'm not reflecting anybody else's opinion. It was based on years and years of interaction with various administrations, with this Congress, and even when I was serving as a foreign policy advisor to Donald Trump in 2016-17. Second, regardless of what that ideology and identity meant, yes, some factions could be given a chance. I believe in this. Even if they haven't changed their ideology, a chance would mean that act as a non-jihadist. So we have had a recognition of that regime, but at least we gave the chance, not on the ground of ideology, but on the ground of maybe you're inspired by God, by Allah, and you change. It did happen in history. But when we hear and see that in March of 2025, massive slaughter and massacres of Alawites, and this is not we're not in the 19th century, we heard about them, we saw them live in some places, but we saw them clearly, that there was a mass killing of Alawites. And the majority of Alawites are not what they call fulul or remnants. Their majority are normal people in their society. Then we saw in July that there was a massacre against the Druze. So in conclusion, very short conclusion, it is very important that you communicate to Congress, that we communicate with the administration, that we make sure that there is a chance in the policy of the United States to engage in dialogue with the minorities in Syria. So with this, I applaud you and thank you for coming here today. Thank you so much.